Hello, good evening. Welcome to another episode of American Reconquista. I'm your host, Emilio Pons. Tonight, I'm joined by two friends and colleagues from the New York Young Republican Club. We have Troy Olson and my producer, Ian McMath. Welcome, both of you, and thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Great to be here as usual. Thank you.
So tonight's topic is immigration. This is a topic that I've been wanting to cover for a very, very long time, if for no other reason that I myself have been a legal immigrant in various countries. And one of the things that annoy me the most out of the illiberal elites in the United States is their views on immigration and the fact that they can distinguish between 189 different genders, but they cannot distinguish between legal and illegal migrants. And just as I was telling Troy right before we started recording, if you want to meet anybody who's more vehemently opposed to immigration than your average Republican, you need to talk to somebody like myself who came to this country legally, paid several thousands of dollars in USCIS fees and other legal fees and attorneys' fees to do things legally, to have their lives scrutinized, only to see people during the Biden administration waltz their way into this country. Also, as a German citizen, this is something that really means a lot to me, because I've seen what has happened with Germany and with Europe in general since back in the summer of 2015. Angela Merkel decided basically unilaterally to open the doors of Germany and to the rest of Europe to all the worst type of immigration from the third world in Africa and the Muslim world. So again, thank you for being here. And let me start by quoting my good friend Heather McDonald. These are a few quotes from an online lecture that she gave at Hillsdale College on February 18th, 2015. And we'll see that we really have learned nothing since then. Back then, she said, and I quote, "The lesson from the last 20 years of immigration policy is that lawlessness breeds more lawlessness. Once a people or government decide to normalize one form of law-breaking, other forms of lawlessness will follow until finally the rule of law itself is in jeopardy." This is the most important message that I need to get across tonight. Then I'll share 4 more short snippets from this talk, which I strongly recommend everyone watching this episode to go and watch. She says, "An utterly secure border is impossible. People will always find a way to cross, but if once they cross, nothing can be done to them, then we may as well not have any borders at all." Another one. "The advocates for illegal immigration have spent all their energy fighting deportation rather than fighting increased border security because they know that eradicating the former is far more important." 2 more. "Low-level misdemeanor offenses like graffiti, turnstile jumping, drunk driving, and drug sales have an outsized impact on a community's perception of public safety and on the actual reality of crime. Enforcing misdemeanor offenses is an effective way of incapacitating more serious criminals." And finally, "In the twisted leftist worldview, if it is morally unacceptable to deport even a convicted illegal alien criminal, then it is all the more unacceptable to deport someone who is merely crossing the border illegally." So let's start with you, Troy. You are Sergeant in Arms of the club, and you are also an attorney at law, as myself.
My background, yeah, is in law.
So you are more than well equipped to talk about immigration. Also being an American of...
I have a lot of views on it. I can
origin.
talk about it legally. A lot of travel experience, a lot of experience throughout the world, as you have. And yeah, I think in the Army is maybe where this fact was driven home the most.
Why is it in the Army that it was particularly driven home?
The beauty of serving in the military is you get to see a lot of the world, especially in the post 9/11 era. We got to see a lot of the world, and you get to. I think it's one thing if you're a kid growing up in a small town in the heartland of the United States of America.
Which in your case is Minnesota.
Detroit Lakes, Minnesota, a small town of about 10,000. And still, to this day, very much has a social fabric and is very similar, votes about 65% Republican in the county. Very much still probably better than when I was a kid. Well, one of the only places I've been where I can say that. But, you get out of your bubble, you get out of your corner of the world, and you travel, you see major cities. You turn 19, you see homelessness for the first time in a major city. You see crime, you join the Army. And in the Army, you see it on the global scale. So it's just sort of all of the things that your faith taught you, your teachers, your mentors, your parents taught you about your world. You start to realize there's a bigger, more complex picture that arises, and it's especially the parts that you wanted to be true, that you realize are not true.
Such as?
Most of the world is not like the United States of America. What we have here is a tremendous gift. It's a miracle, really. It's a miracle. It's an exception to the story of human history, if anything. Mm-hmm. Most of human history is a really tragic and sad story. Yet we are here and we're still chugging along. But there's no guarantee that if we don't take care of what we have built and what we have, that it will continue to be as it's been, whether it's the United States of America or other civilizational spheres of the world. And what I saw in the Army was a lot of the world doesn't work well. Human nature is unchanged and doesn't change, and only gets made better through having a civilized world, a civilization, and then crucially through the family unit, socialization, and through your peer group and your communities. And throughout much of the world, all of that is totally broken down. And throughout a lot of the Western world, it has too a great deal. And this immigration issue, illegal immigration, mass migration of illegals into this country, into the West, has really hit at the social fabric tremendously. So we're becoming more like the world that I saw.
Right.
And it's not really going to end up being good for anyone in the long run.
Correct. It's becoming more like the world that I grew up in.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm a dual German and Mexican citizen, but I grew up in Mexico City, and I grew up already in the green side of the fence of Mexico City, but that never prevented me from seeing the other side of the fence because you can't escape it. Particularly if you're not part of the masses of the third world that are scraping by to survive. And when people ask me why it is that I'm a conservative and why I'm so staunchly conservative and why I don't have a naive worldview, it's precisely because of my background, having grown up not just in a third world country, but also in a dictatorship. I'm 48 years old. I was born in 1977. So for the first 23 years of my life, my country was a dictatorship. I left earlier than that, but nevertheless, the fact remains that Mexico was a one-party dictatorship until 2000. And if that doesn't put things in perspective for Americans who believe that we are all the same, de facto and not just under the law, they're completely deluded, because this country has had a working democracy for a lot longer than we have, even though our independence only happened maybe roughly 3 decades after the American independence, right?
Yep.
And so you have to look at the factors that made Mexico so drastically different from the United States. I don't know if you know this book. I forget who the author is, but it's a book about why some societies fail and others don't. And like basically it starts with a chapter about why Laredo and Nuevo Laredo are so different. Yeah. And it has to do with the way that the Spanish viewed their colonies in Latin America, as opposed to the way the original British settlers saw the United States, and how they went about creating a new world. And of course, the completely different backgrounds of the colonial Spain integrating a completely incompatible society into their midst, and arguably, of course, through very rough ways, the English society making sure that they had hegemony over the new land. I want to talk a little bit about the different waves of immigration in this country, because I think that they really have a very, very strong impact on the negative aftermath of immigration in this country, depending on when we look at immigration waves and also immigration law. A lot of people are not aware of the fact that there were 3 big waves of immigration to the United States. One primarily between the 1840s and the 1850s. Then another one between the 1890s and World War I. And then another big change came about in recent decades, which is the one that really created a lot of problems after changes in American immigration law in 1965. I'm talking specifically about the Hart-Celler Act of 1965, called the Immigration and Nationality Act, that, amongst other things, abolished national origins quota systems, established a family and skills-based immigration system, created numerical limits, increased immigration from non-European countries, did away with restrictions on immigration from non-Western countries, and had other negative impacts on skilled workers. What can you say as a lawyer about the Hart-Celler Act of 1965?
Well, Hart-Celler has been one of the most devastating laws that's been passed in terms of how it's affected the United States of America throughout our history, I think. And it was sold on a lie. A lot of the congressional conversation at the time, the public debate at the time, was very clear about the fact that, because if you're an opponent of it at the time, you're going to read all that. Certainly we will with our modern ears and be like, that's going to dramatically change the demographic complexion and makeup of the United States. There's no way it won't. And they said, no, it won't. It won't. They were very clear about that. I think that bill's primary sponsor was Ted Kennedy, who was maybe a few years in the Senate at the time. And it was at the time that Democrats had just won huge majorities after the 1964 election with LBJ, and not too long after Kennedy was assassinated, John F. Kennedy. And so it kind of was this almost fluke of history that ended up aging incredibly, incredibly bad. But like every really bad decision, there were people that brought up all of the things that ended up happening. There's always a few people that were right. And that's why whenever we pass a law in this country, when I get the most nervous is when there's broad consensus for something. That's when I'm the most skeptical.
And the thing is, today's liberals always insist on, well, we're a nation of immigrants. Yeah, but a nation of what type of immigrants? That's like the devil is in the details, right? Yep. And so this was a nation of immigrants, but it was a nation of primarily European immigrants for the longest time, up until 1965. Yep. And so there was no issue of incompatibility between cultures, because the immigrants who came from Ireland, Italy, France, Germany, Spain, Portugal, you name it, came more or less from the same cultural milieu as the original British settlers of this country. Yeah. And so that's one of the things that, one of the fatal flaws in the thinking of the typical a modern day liberal when they think of like, well, we're a nation of immigrants. And the other thing too that they forget is that back then some of the immigrants were indeed more skilled than the native population of yore, and also they've failed to bear in mind that the more industrial, less developed economy of a century ago needed more workers than the knowledge-based economy of our time, to say nothing about the AI economy that is about to dominate the markets. And crucially, there was also no welfare back then, and there was no incentive to come to the USA to live off of welfare. So the combination of open immigration to the third world, to everybody from the lesser evil third world of Mexico and Latin America and the rest of Latin America, to the very evil and very antithetical immigration from Africa and the Islamic world, and India and some other parts of the world that are still stuck in, the Middle Ages. Yeah. I mean, that type of immigration combined with welfare has just been an absolutely toxic and disastrous policy for this country.
Well, I always like to say that liberals do not know a ton about history, but the four things they do know are devastating. Yeah. And one of those myths is we're a nation of immigrants. That is part of a story, a much broader story. I think it's most accurate to say that we're a nation of pioneers and settlers, then pioneers.
Right.
And primarily English, almost all English. There were other people here at the time, of course, too. But the philosophical direction of the country, the form its government would take, was from people who were British. And then onward from that, every wave of immigration had its own challenges too, and it was all within Europe with only very small exceptions. And even probably the most successful era that they cite, which is the 20th century, Ellis Island era winding down, but then everyone getting along, and it's the 1950s, and everyone has a house, a car or two, and and
is able to afford tuition.
Has four kids, and the baby boomers are born, and everything's perfect. And
so, in my opinion, the fatal flaw that a lot of so-called liberals make is to assume that all immigration is the same, and that all immigration across all times is the same. They forget, crucially, that the immigration that built this country really in the 19th century was more skilled than the native population of yore, these European immigrants. Also, that back then we had a more industrial, less developed economy, and so we needed more workers than the type of knowledge-based economy that we now have, to say nothing of the AI revolution that is about to happen. And also, crucially, there was no welfare, and therefore there was no incentive to come to the USA to live off of welfare, which is what we see happening now over and over.
The incentives then were to come here and work. There was opportunity, but you had to work for it, and you had to work very hard for it. And the first generation in America was giving up their identity, by coming here. First generation, learning the language would be quite difficult. In my family's history, I don't think, they still spoke Norwegian on the farm, for instance, and it wasn't until my dad's generation that he didn't know Norwegian, and his dad, I think, probably had forgot it by the time he was really old. But that's Norway. That's Northern Europe. That's Western Europe. These are very
compatible cultures. And I would argue that stretch of land invented a lot of what we call modernity. Mm-hmm. And then that came over to the United States of America and spread over this continent and did especially well because it was the same stock of people, same set of values. So what we have now, the incentives we have now are we have larger welfare states that have been built up over the last 100 years. And so if you're coming here, you're incentivized by the welfare state and what you could possibly get. And you're also incentivized by political liberals who politically need you to come here to survive as a political organization, quite frankly. Yeah, because basically what the Democrats have been doing is importing third world immigrants illegally to create eventually a new set of voters who are nothing but clients of the state and who need the state to survive because they bring absolutely no skills with them. And frankly, not even a work ethic that will contribute anything to this country or this society.
And by the way, even when that works out for them, it backfires on them. And the example of that, I think, is Mayor Frey in Minneapolis, who has gone out of his way to pander to the Somalians there. Doesn't matter. They're not voting for him. They voted for, not even voted for, it was like this corrupt party caucus. And his mayoral career there will be the fate of every white liberal, white progressive in this country, really. They will get overwhelmed by what they've invited here, thinking that they will remain on the top of that power structure. And they really do deeply believe they will remain on the top of it, and they want to. And everything else is just rhetoric to the contrary. But they won't. They'll get overwhelmed by it, and they'll get tossed overboard the first chance that whoever they've invited there gets. I don't think it will. I think it will be mostly localized examples like that. I do think I am optimistic in the long run that we're going to turn this around, but it will be hard, and people have to continue to be vigilant.
What do you think are the main obstacles to the Trump administration's vision for a safer, illegal migrant-free country, given the fact that there is so much emphasis nowadays on due process and following the rule of law to fix a problem that was created through a blatant disregard for the rule of law by the Biden administration?
Hands down, all the major cities. Those are the biggest problems. I always would say that I didn't understand why, if you're an illegal immigrant, you wouldn't disappear into the interior where the cost of living is more affordable and everything's a little bit easier. But of course, the answer to that question actually is in major cities, they can get the generous welfare programs well beyond whatever they would get nationally. But also they have a political organization dedicated to helping them with legal aid for immigration attorneys, with all sorts of stuff like that, and down to just hiding them wherever in employment or whatever it is.
And the facts speak for themselves, because in fact, the top U.S. cities with the largest unauthorized immigrant populations are primarily run by Democrats. Yeah. You have New York City with an estimated 1.1 million illegals, LA with 900,000, Houston with 575,000, Dallas 475,000, Chicago 450,000, Miami 400,000, DC and metro area, including Northern Virginia and Maryland, 375,000. San Francisco, 300,000. Atlanta, 250,000. And Phoenix, Arizona, 225,000. I mean, these numbers basically represent not only the populations of any number of average American cities, some of them, or the aggregate number, actually surpasses the population of many a small European country.
Yeah.
And yet we are constantly bombarded with this absolute false narrative by the so-called liberals. I have to call them so-called, because absolutely. What the common people think about a liberal today is nothing but a liberal. They're very illiberal and very authoritarian in their worldview. I mean, it's untenable. The fact that the Biden administration let in more than 10 million immigrants in 4 years is unfathomable. It's the largest percentage per capita since the 1840s in terms of immigration. And this is something that people do not really take into account, and they think that it will not alter the demographics and the future of this country. Why? How can they possibly assume that such a large-scale event will not have nefarious consequences for the country?
Well, let's talk about the consequences. That 1.1 million number in New York City, for instance, there's your entire housing crisis.
Correct.
You know, like that's like, and then we could go across all those major cities, and
it's housing, is crime statistics. Yeah. Obviously, it's the deficits that all these cities end up running.
Who have to balance their budgets. Cities, states, you know, the federal government can it's not a good thing, but can run up debt. Mm-hmm. And we have been very good at that. Cities actually have to balance their books, though. New York City is a municipal corporation that has to balance its budget every year. Mm-hmm. That right there, you know, there are finite resources here, and it's really bizarre to me because, like, the progressives go on about a lack of housing, and we're in a housing crisis all the time, but we have 3.7 million units of housing in this city. You said there are 1.1 million illegals here. You know, population-wise, let's say 8.5. Do you agree to that number? Mm-hmm. 8.5 million total. That's like between two and a half people per unit.
Yeah.
I mean, what are you talking? We had 2.4 million units in 1960 when the city's population was basically 8 million. So it's not like the population has grown a lot overall, and to the extent that it has, it's been very much driven by illegals. So, and then, you know, that's obviously that's a more of a progressive issue. Mm-hmm. Not that many conservative New Yorkers, of course, we have our issues with the cost of housing too, and we're going to say that too. But I'd say our bigger issues, we're talking about public safety, crime, quality of life measures, and you see that every day. That's an everyday. Your rent or your mortgage, that's one day a month where it's like, but the crime and quality of life stuff, that's every single day.
Every single day. Yeah. And also, there's always also this myth of the illegal taking up jobs that Americans are not willing to do, which is absolutely not true. And
we saw that down in, was it Atlanta recently? The big factory?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. With the ICE raid, exactly. Yeah. It was a Nissan, I think, right?
Yeah.
A factory, yeah.
I could grab almost any American off the street, and they would love that job.
Yeah. But not only that, I think also the liberals also fail routinely to bear in mind that there are legal ways for these workers that they always associate with illegal migrants to come here to the country and work legally. There's the H-2A temporary agricultural workers program that allows U.S. companies to hire foreign workers for seasonal temporary agricultural jobs. You know, they can have these visas for up to 1 year. And you know there are benefits even for the employees, because the employers are required to offer free housing, at least 75% of the work hours listed in the contract, the prevailing wage rate, et cetera, et cetera. There's a H-2B temporary non-agricultural workers program. There's a TN visa for Mexican and Canadian workers. And of course, there's also the permanent residency green card option for certain agricultural workers. So there is a possibility to have legal migration that will do the kind of work that that liberals always claim that illegals are only suitable for. But we also have to talk about the type of illegal work that illegal migrants do and the type of ramifications for the rule of law that there are. Working in the United States without proper authorization is typically just a civil violation, but in certain cases, it actually can escalate to a criminal offense. Yeah. So that's another thing that a lot of people don't know. If an unauthorized immigrant uses a fake social security number, which they very often do, or a stolen identity to work, that is a criminal offense. There is absolutely every reason for ICE to deport these people.
If an American citizen does that, that's also a criminal offense.
Correct. So why should an illegal have any better treatment than an American citizen? And the fines and the imprisonment can be as high as 5 years behind bars. But beyond that, there are many negative effects on illegal immigration that go beyond crime, beyond housing and work. We have the effects on educational funding and resources, right? So with more illegal immigration, you have increased enrollment in schools, and this carries obviously funding challenges. You have then performance and achievement gaps because, of course, the children of illegal migrants who come here not knowing English are going to be lagging behind because their English proficiency is going to be very, very limited, and that will result in achievement gaps that cannot be socially engineered to be fixed. There are also legal barriers to education, because undocumented students are ineligible for federal financial aid, for example, and many of them end up then not being able to enroll in college, which means that they will never really be part of the larger economy. Many of them end up leaving school to support their families, just like they do in the third world where they come from. So, I mean, there are many ramifications to legal immigration that the common liberal never even bothers to ponder about, because they're more concerned about coming across as good people, trademark, than doing what's best, not just for their country and their communities, but also even for these people themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And on the flip side of every illegal story is someone who is an American citizen benefiting from it. For instance, in the bureaucracy. Enrollment, funding pegged to enrollment. Mm-hmm. Enrollment is down. People are not having enough kids, especially in New York City. So you're going to lose funding. What has helped fill that gap has been 1.1 million illegals, to the extent that they're in the K through 12 age range. That's definitely kept them from losing a lot of per pupil funding. And I think there is a bureaucratic, you look at the DHS, Department of Social Services is the second line item in the budget. DOE is the largest public school system in the country. We're talking $43 billion for one, social services at $21 billion. That's $63 billion in a city that is about half of the budget right there. That's massive bureaucratic interests that gets to organized labor, public employee unions. Let's go to the hotels, the migrant hotels, the illegal migrant hotels here. That's a contract that the hotel owner gets.
Which, by the way, many of these hotel owners are actually foreign, including Pakistani corporations.
So I would say that it's at least on some level a big business now. for a lot of people, and especially under President Biden. See, before Biden, there was plausible deniability behind some of it. Like Obama did deport a good portion of people.
Except that this is one of the big myths about Obama.
Right.
He did not really deport that many people. He immediately caught and sent back would-be illegal migrants.
That's right.
That's a big distinction.
Yeah, that's important. Thank you for pointing that out immediately. But like rhetorically, if you listen to his 2008 campaign, if you listen to Bill Clinton in the 90s, there was enough rhetoric going on. And also the immigration politics had not completely switched over. It was at least a split a little bit more. The right was starting to become stridently anti-illegal immigration in the 90s, but it had not yet matured through a specific presidential candidacy. I remember there were candidates before Trump in 2016, but they didn't quite have enough to get all the way there. It was just an issue. They would poll, maybe third or fourth. They'd be in the conversation. Buchanan springs to mind, Pat Buchanan. He brought up all this stuff in the early 90s, ended up being right about all of it. But, he was not able to even really win a state. He had a good showing. He had a pretty good movement. He ran third party. A lot of what Ross Perot brought up on the economic realm, especially about some of these other issues. Both of them ended up being right about a lot of this stuff. They were ahead of their time, and Trump's sort of the fulfillment of that. And I don't think we get to a President Trump if we had different immigration policies. If we didn't have Hart-Celler, that's what I say to every liberal. I'm like, if you dislike Trump so bad, you shouldn't have done all these policies. You shouldn't have had Joe Biden lying about immigration to our faces like we're children for 4 or 5 years in a row, where the border's totally open. You're inviting people to come.
Not only is the border completely open, he actually sued the government of Texas, Governor Abbott, to make sure that the border actually was open. And you see the footage of these machinery breaking down the border so that hordes of undocumented migrants can get into the country. And I shouldn't use the term undocumented migrants, because that's a euphemism of the left, right?
Well, and that's what
illegal invaders can get into the country.
The mass criminal illegal invasion. And that's what I really mean, though, is prior to Biden made it so open and notorious that you couldn't possibly ignore it anymore.
Right.
Whereas prior to him, there was at least a convo going on still, that. Oh, it's not so bad.
What was great about the Biden administration's time is that it showed the hypocrisy of the left. Because nobody got organized quicker and in a more determined way than all the rich housewives at Martha's Vineyards.
That was great.
At the instant that all these illegal migrants were dropped at their fancy footsteps. They were like gone within 24 hours. Like, oh, we love our migrants. Oh, but not here. Please go back to Venezuela. We don't care. And this is something that happens to me all the time. I'm not going to name names, but I was having a conversation about illegal immigration just a week ago in the Hamptons, and it's so ridiculous to hear these extremely wealthy people saying like, oh, but who's going to take care of our gardens if your evil Trump gets away with what he's doing? Is like, really, like you pretend to care about illegal migrants, but all you care about is having cheap labor. Why don't you just come clean about it? At least the Republicans are honest. They're not pretending to be ABC when in fact they're DEF, I mean,
I certainly care about the economic arguments, and historically it was probably my first area that I cared about it the most. But the older I get, the more I care about the cultural
it's a main
and societal argument.